Those skills that made you excellent at your work, your technical expertise, your client relationships, your ability to get things done, those skills do not automatically make you a leader your team can follow. Leadership presence is not about your personality. It's not a case of having it or not having it. It's really the result of 5 specific behaviors. And when you practice them, your team experiences you as someone worth following, whether you're feeling confident or not. Hi, I'm Cris. It's my mission to help service-based business owners move away from founder-led delivery by teaching leadership, team building, and system skills. I have spent years working with small businesses doing exactly this. Today, I'm walking you through all 5 of these behaviors of leadership presence, what they are, why they matter, and what you can do starting this week. But before we get to those 5 dimensions, I really want to address a common misunderstanding that I see with owners who are stepping into leadership. They're growing their teams. A lot of people think leadership presence means being a certain type of person. Everyone has their idea of who this person is. So maybe it's someone who's very confident or decisive or authoritative or natural in a room. So they either believe they have these things or they do not. And from what I've seen working in rooms full of 100 leaders or working with one-on-one with owners building their teams, leaders who genuinely have presence are not performing a personality type. They're being very authentic. They're doing specific things consistently. And these are the 5 behaviors that you can tie right into who you are. These things are learnable. So you don't have to change yourself in order to be the leader who you aspire to be. The 5 behaviors we're going to cover today are clarity of communication, decisiveness, listening skills, emotional awareness, and consistency. Your team is reading all 5 of them every day, whether you are being intentional about them or not. So let's be intentional. First of all, we're going to talk about clarity of communication. I'm going to go through the handy tool here right after I say a few words to you. This is available as a link in the training or in the link below this video, so you can follow along there if you would like. So clarity of communication is really when you're communicating a decision or expectation, you want to make sure your team understands it very, very clearly the first time. And when you make a decision, you want to make sure you're explaining the why behind it in a way that actually makes sense. Sometimes it's difficult for us to get our visions out of our brains into the kind of team sphere. So you really want to be clear and make sure you're making sense. Those are the 2 questions that are really at the core of communication that builds your leadership presence. This matters a lot because when communication is clear, people can act. And when it's not, your people are filling in the gaps themselves. And those gaps are creating confusion, some rework, some inconsistent output. Standards aren't being met the way that you would like them to be, not because your team lacks motivation, but because they didn't maybe actually know what you needed, wanted, or expected. So I've, of course, had this show up in my own leadership. When I found when I could be specific about expectations and transparent about the reasoning behind my decisions, my team became far less dependent on checking back in with me. They were confident in doing the work because they understood where it was going and why it mattered and what the expectations and standards were. So if you find your team is asking you a lot of the same follow-up questions, especially if they're repeated a lot, the issue is probably not comprehension. I'm going to guess the original message left some gaps and they're doing their best with incomplete direction. They want to do a good job, so they're going to try to fill in those gaps. What you can do here is use a 5-part clarity script if you're looking to work on in this area and make sure that you are being clear. Before you're closing conversations, especially ones about decisions or expectations, you can check whether you've covered these 5 points. What is the decision or expectation? That maybe is funny to hear here, but the thing about it is sometimes we get into these big conversations and we never actually determine or express what these decisions or expectations are. Again, you want to talk about why it matters, what is happening next, who is owning what, and what good looks like when it's done. So you're setting those standards. You don't always have to go into equal depth on each point. Depends on the situation, but running through this mentally before you end the conversation will close a lot of gaps before they become problems. This is a great habit to get into as well, because this will just start coming naturally to you and you'll be able to have that clear communication. If you find you want to work on your clear communication, you can ask yourself this reflection question. Where do you tend to leave people guessing? Work backward from that confusion you're currently seeing on your team. This is usually where your clarity gap is. So if we're looking at our companion here, we have our message and making sure we're covering those 5 points. Clarity means your team can act. Danger zone, unclear. The team is filling in those gaps, and they are, they do want to do good work, and they're going to try to do that as best they think they can using their own experiences and their standards, which might be different than yours, and you want to make sure that those are clearly communicated. So your team can be acting. Lots of times, unclear communication is about habit, not skill. So on your part, I guess, which is why we want to get into these habits. And eventually these will become very natural. We have our 5-part clarity script in here as a reminder you can use as a takeaway. And usually this is a communication gap that's happening, not a motivation gap. If you're finding that your team isn't acting the way you want them to, it's probably you. Sorry to say it, but it's true. And then a leader who communicates clearly comes across as prepared and control. People cannot do good work from vague direction. I think this is a really important point. So clarity is really that visible sign of leadership presence that you can absolutely be leaning into to make sure the team is following you along the way that you want them to. All right. Dimension number 2, decisiveness, being able to decide. So decisiveness, simply moving forward with confidence, even when you don't have every piece of information, and you're holding your decisions unless something very genuinely meaningful changes. This matters because your indecision is costing your team time and confidence. When you're hesitating, maybe you're revisiting settled decisions. Maybe you're looping in too many people before acting. Your team, really, you're just teaching them that they need to wait. And lots of times this is preventing really good work from being done. So they're stopped maybe bringing things forward too, because they know that the answer might shift or might not come at all. And so it's kind of like, well, why do I want to bother with this if it's not going to, if I'm not going to be heard here? I definitely learned this one directly. I was in a corporate job. I was early in leading a large project in a new environment. And what was happening is I was including way too many peers and team members in decisions that were mine to make. I thought I was being collaborative, but what I was really doing is slowing everything down. And without realizing, I was absolutely undermining my own authority. Bad danger right there. So when I stopped doing that, things changed. And then people started realizing they could come to me and get an answer, and it would be the answer. It would be the decision moving forward. So decisiveness, I think it's really important to note too. It's really not about being right every time. I don't think that that's possible. It can't really be your standard. The standard is really making that sound call with the information you have and then moving forward. If you find that your decisions are sitting longer with you than the situation actually requires, your team is really absorbing that delay, and they're not working ahead because they don't know what foot they'll be standing on tomorrow. So if you're seeing those delays, maybe you're holding back on a decision that they're waiting for you. A tool you can use here, you've probably heard of it before, the 80% rule. You're almost never going to have the complete information that you need before your decision needs to be made. So when you have roughly 80% of what you need, you can decide, and you can be asking yourself, what do I know? What is the cost of waiting? And what is good enough to decide on now? The most important question that you can be asking yourself, though, what are you giving up by not deciding? When you get into the habit of naming your trade-offs, it gets a lot easier to act. So if you're looking to work on your decisiveness reflection question, you can ask yourself, where do you wait longer than the situation actually requires? And if you're asking yourself that and you're seeing patterns, definitely worth taking a look at that. So let's have a little peek at our guide here. So we have, we're acting on the 80%. And if we're waiting for more, we're just waiting. And you really want to be asking yourself, what is the cost of waiting? Because there is a cost that comes along with that. And then, of course, an overview of what we just talked about. Indecisions, teaching your team to wait. Try that 80% rule. Asking yourself, what is the cost of waiting? This really changes how you act. Revisiting settled decisions really does train people that any decision is temporary, and that's very disruptive. And then just giving yourself some grace. It's not possible to make the right choice every time. So make the call and move forward. And the takeaway here, when you make a call and hold it, your team experiences you as somebody with conviction, and that is presence in action. Awesome. So let's move on to dimension 3, which is listening skills. Really, listening skills, it means genuinely listening to your team's perspective before you respond or make a decision. And when someone disagrees with you and you want them to be disagreeing with you, you ask questions to understand rather than defending your position. This is a great way to actually get into the meat and potatoes of things. This really matters. The best leaders I've ever seen were careful listeners. When I was speaking to them, I actually felt seen. This is not a small thing. It creates psychological safety in your team. And listening is builds psychological safety, and it directly affects what your team is willing to bring you. I think that's a really important point. Your team members have context about their work that you don't have. You're not in their trenches day to day. They are so much closer to it than you are. And so when you're genuinely listening, you're getting that information. When you don't, you could be making a decision without the full picture. And I know we talked about the 80% rule. I'm just a firm believer of having all the voices at the table who that decision might affect. It doesn't mean you have to agree. There's also something really important here about buy-in. When people are feeling heard, they're far more likely to support a direction, even if it's not what they recommended. So explaining your reasoning and genuinely considering their input really does create that. So I think that's an important point. You can take that information. You can spend 5 minutes gathering the data. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with what they're saying. But you do want to communicate why you went the direction that you did, just like we were talking about in that clarity of communication. If you find that your team has started raising concerns, or if the information you're getting really feels filtered or maybe incomplete, your listening is worth taking a look at, because a team that has learned that their input doesn't seem to be valued, they're just going to stop offering it, and you're going to miss out on a lot of really important information. A great tool here is to paraphrase before responding. So if you're responding to a concern or possibly a disagreement, and I don't mean disagreement in a bad way, I just mean there's different perspectives and opinions, you can reflect back what you heard. Not to agree with it, because you don't have to agree like we just talked about, but to show you understand it. So as an example, something like, okay, what I'm hearing is the issue is less about the deadline and more about not knowing the standard we're working to. Is that right? So this is part of a conversation. Maybe you as the leader, you're concerned about deadlines. You want to make sure you're meeting those. Whereas your team is missing some information. Those are two very different things. And if you can get that information, you can then correct what's happening there and get into that clarity of communication that we talked about before. So a few questions you can be asking. You can also ask whatever questions suit your team's culture, your personality. Just following up. What makes you see it that way? What are you most concerned about? What else do you want me to know? Those types of things. And then again, doing that reflection back and saying, okay, here's what I'm hearing you say. Is that correct? If you're wanting to work in this area, you can ask yourself this reflection question. When do you listen mainly to prepare your reply? I think we're all definitely guilty of this. So notice those types of conversations when you're doing this, or what kinds of pressure are you feeling when you're replying over actually hearing or listening. This is where to put your attention to kind of step back and do a little reset there. So here we have our companion guide. We really want to be paraphrasing before responding. We're making better decisions as leaders. Again, tying back to decisiveness, you want a balance between getting too much information and the relevant information. Your team that feels heard is much more likely to bring things to you. Their paraphrasing shows that you're responding to understand. And really that presence that you're wanting to build, it is about listening just as much, if not more, than you're speaking. And I love the idea that curiosity over ego is really going to get you the information that you need. So you're walking in curious, not waiting to respond. So our takeaway here is that when the team is feeling heard, they absolutely trust you more. You're building that trust. That trust is what gives you that real presence in a room. Moving on to our next dimension is awareness, emotional awareness. Noticing how your mood or stress level is affecting the way you show up. That's really what we're talking about here. And staying professional and measured with your team, even when things are difficult. We all have difficult days. We all have these disruptions in our emotional awareness, and putting this at the top of the list along with these other 4 behaviors is really going to take you far. And it really matters because everything is trickling down. So whether you're intending it or not, your team is feeling your stress. They're feeling your frustration. And when they respond to it, they're often adjusting their own behavior around yours rather than doing the actual work. So they're kind of managing you at the same time you're managing them. I have had days where it felt like everyone was getting away with too much. I'm sure you can relate, or like nothing was going the way it should. In these moments, the worst thing that I could have done was let that spill into how I was showing up. Not because I had to pretend everything was fine, but because my team did not deserve to absorb my state when what they needed was direction, which we're kind of going through in all of these other behaviors as well. If my team, or if your team or anyone's team doesn't know which version of the leader they're going to get on a given day, that uncertainty really erodes your presence over time. You're going to lose respect. You're going to lose followership, not because of any single moment, because of this pattern of ups and downs and not being able to be aware of your emotional state, whatever is happening at the moment. But when you're managing that emotional state, you really give your team something to orient around. That is what presence looks like in practice. And so something to watch out for here, if important conversations are getting delayed or people are waiting for a better moment, maybe they're tiptoeing around a little bit, or if your team's communication is shifting noticeably when you're under pressure, emotional awareness is likely a part of what is going on here. So here's a great tool, checking in before you're stepping in. So before walking to difficult conversations or reacting to a situation, or possibly any conversation or situation, you can take 10 seconds and ask yourself these 3 things. What am I bringing to this conversation right now? What do I actually want to accomplish here? And how do I want to show up? The third question is so important because when you're aware of the answer before you walk in, it changes how you walk in. So if you're having a hard day, that is allowed. That happens. You are human. I'm human. We have those days. The question is how you work that for yourself so it does not land on your team. For some people, that means stepping out for half an hour. Maybe it means talking to a peer. There's many coping mechanisms you can use to kind of step out of yourself and make sure that you're showing up and you're answering that question. How do I want to show up? Do a bit of a reset. Figure out what works for you. If you're looking at working in this area, great reflection question for yourself here. What tends to change in how you show up when you're under pressure? We've all had those moments. Think of a recent situation where your frustration showed up in a way that maybe you would want to change or not choose again. What was your trigger and what would a check-in have changed? So really thinking about those moments. And looking at our companion here, we're managing our state. We're looking at, our high stress leaking into the team. And if you're checked in, your team is staying protected. And you really do want that. That does continue to build that psychological safety that is so valuable on your team. Remembering here, everything is trickling down on hard days. It's how you're working through those hard days. Doing that pre-conversation check-in. We have the questions here. If you're unaware of your state, you're really losing a lot of the other dimensions we're talking about here. You're losing your ability to decide well, communicate clearly, and losing your ability to listen all at once. You're kind of throwing all of those things out the window. Pulling out your empathy if you're noticing somebody is struggling. Absorb less, offer more. Your takeaway here, you cannot protect your team from every hard day, but you can protect them from yours. I think that is a really powerful statement and really one of the main takeaways in our lessons here today. All right, 5th, we have consistency. So what it is, your team being able to predict how you will respond because your behavior is reliable and you're probably seeing a pattern here. So you're following through on your commitments and you're having your actions actually reflect your values, the ones that you talk about, the ones that you say you have. This matters because consistency is a long game of confidence and presence. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's not always easy, but a leader can communicate well and make good decisions. But if the team can't predict how the leader will show up from one week to the next, the overall impression is certainly instability and not strength. So I think it's important to note as well, your team is noticing what you're reinforcing. They're noticing what you're letting slide and whether your behavior lines up with what you say matters. So getting into that values conversation. That observation is happening continuously, whether you are paying attention or not. I know this one personally. I was very intentional with one-on-ones on my team. I treated those meetings, they were serious commitments. And if I had to shift one, I made sure it was the same day or maybe the next day. And I always explained why. I knew that rescheduling without a word or, sending a message that I was sending a message I didn't want to send, that their time was less important than whatever else was coming up. And I have been on the receiving end of, one-on-one meetings just being kind of canceled or moved around without explanation. I always felt like, I felt that maybe my time with my leader wasn't as valuable as whatever else they were doing. And so I think, that consistency and making sure I was doing that really did help to build a stronger team. It's a lot of small things. This is what the consistency is actually made of. And also leaning into the other 4 behaviors we're talking about here today. Now, sometimes you need to change a commitment. That is fine. That happens, and that is totally understandable and expected. The move here is to really acknowledge it directly. So this is where we're getting into all of the things we're talking about. Clarity of communication, decisiveness, making sure to be consistent when we're hearing things. I know we had agreed on XYZ. It needs to be ABC instead, and here's why. The why is super important. You're still following through on that commitment, even as you adjust it. You're clearing up any surprises. There's no guessing. That is still consistent action because things do change. But treat how you manage that change consistently, and you will see that that's a very good thing. So if you see your team, I've said this a lot, if you see your team as kind of one of those wait and see patterns or holding off until they know whether something is really sticking, they have learned that some commitments are real and some are not. That takes time to rebuild, so something to certainly focus on. So the tool for this, a weekly consistency audit is very helpful. So at the end of the week, look at 3 things. Think about 3 commitments that you had made during the week. Did you deliver on each one? Think about a value you have spoken about or that you have. Find a behavior that reflected it, and then find one that did not. And also think about, if there's any gaps you're closing in systems or in the team or whatever else, or in yourself or whatever else there might be. Name it to your team and then actually go through and close that gap. Fix that thing. The last one takes some courage. Telling your team you're working on something specific and then following through is one of the fastest ways to rebuild and strengthen trust. So it's a great way to, start that ball rolling if you're feeling like that area is a bit lacking. And if you are feeling that, a great reflection question, where might your team be experiencing you as less predictable than you think you are? That's a hard question to ask ourselves for sure, because, we're really looking inside. That's a very vulnerable question. Where is your consistency strongest right now? And where is the gap they've likely noticed and maybe not even said anything? And depending on how your team is built, you can check in with your team and ask them this question. Say, hey, what are you observing here and how can I improve? Don't worry if your team's not there yet, but it is a great place to get to because you're getting that feedback both ways. And it's very powerful to continue to build that trust and build a strong, high-performing team. So looking at our guide here, consistency, building trust, we can kind of get a visual example of what consistency looks like. Teams are always learning from your patterns. Always, always, always. They're always watching you because they should be. You're the leader. You're the one who's setting the direction. They notice what you're reinforcing and what you're letting slide. I think that's a really important point. You really want to have your words and actions lining up. That's building that trust. If you need to adjust something, address it directly. Long game here is what we're talking about. And then, thinking about that weekly consistency audit. And here is the idea around that if you're looking to implement that in your weekly processes. So consistency is what turns individual strengths into a leadership identity the team can recognize, rely on, and follow. That's a great takeaway from the consistency piece here. Now, at the beginning of the video, I did kind of pop onto this page. I haven't gone through it yet. We're going to do it right now. But first, I just want to say that, and you can see in the graphic here, it's pretty clear. These 5 behaviors, they're not separate. They really do feed into each other. You've seen these patterns as we're going through this video. And so really what's happening is when you're listening well, your communication gets clearer because you actually understand what the team needs. When you're emotionally aware, you're more open to what you're hearing, and that supports better decisions. When you are decisive, your team has direction they can act on, and when all 5 of these things are showing up consistently, your team is experiencing that as leadership presence, and you are feeling more confident. And here's the thing. You don't have to work on all 5 at once. It's really not recommended. It'd probably be very difficult. It's really not how it works. I suggest starting with one thing that resonates the most, or the one where you could already see a bit of a gap. Pick that one tool, practice it for a week, and notice what changes. Build it from there. This is how leadership confidence actually develops, not through like one big crazy effort, but through those repeated small choices made with intention over time. And there's no end. So maybe that sounds scary, but I promise it does get easier as you're working on these things and practicing these things. You will find they come much more naturally over time, and watch the magic happen in your team, and watch the magic happen for yourself as you're feeling more confident in your business. So looking over, we have our little graphic here, which shows how all of these dimensions are together. So, we're talking about leadership confidence and presence as the output of these 5 behaviors. It's not a fixed trait. This is something you can work on. Your team is reading all of these dimensions every single day, whether you're intentional about them or not. Start with one, practice over a week. Even though you're feeling uncertain, you can be experienced as confident, even when, especially if you're being consistent. Because again, we're all human beings, we're showing our human side, and that's going to help with that psychological safety as well. And then where are you focusing? You're building conditions to build confidence, not performing. You actually want to be confident, not act like the boss. You want to be the leader. Those are 2 very, very different things that I will be talking about in the future. So confidence and presence are built through repeated small choices, not one defining moment. This is a lifelong journey. And the more you can be aware of this and build into this, the better leader you will become, and the stronger your business will be, because your team will take a lot more leadership. All right. So if this gave you something useful, I'd love to invite you to go deeper. I have a full training on all 5 of these dimensions inside my Leadership Systems Studio. It's a community I run for B2B service business owners who are building stronger leadership, team building, and system skills. In the training, there's a scorecard, there's a workbook, and a step-by-step session that walks you through the whole framework so you can see exactly where you are strong and where to put your attention first. It's a very cool training. I was super excited to put it together. Got a lot of great feedback on it. You can find a link to the community in the video companion guide we've used today. It's right down here on the bottom, and the link is available to you either in a comment or just below this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one, and I just hope you're having a great leadership journey.